Happy Christmas, everybody. My feeble attempt at doing Mum's obituary, which was a bit of a disaster because I couldn't share it with people who didn't have social media. So I decided to redo it, and I'm going to leave out some of the ad-libs that I had used last time. So sorry if you've already heard it. Stop now. But there are a few new bits in which I've added, which I remembered later. So I wanted to do it so that I could share it with people who don't do Facebook and things like that. So, firstly, I just wanted to thank everybody for their very kind messages following Mum's death on Tuesday, the 12th of December. We've been overwhelmed by the number of kind and supportive comments we've received. All who knew her knew she was determined, so this is my obituary for Mum, which is what I would have said if Mum had allowed us to hold a funeral. This had been shared with Melinda, but not Jaime, as he's extremely busy at this time of the year. And frankly, I'm not entirely sure he is capable of using his phone anyway, without assistance from Robert, who is equally busy. So, the Honourable Susan Ann Lowther, born 7/10/1934, died 12 December 2023 at precisely 15:55. Formerly Foa, latterly Lowther, mother to me, Talia, and Jaime, Foa, and Melinda Lowther, now Lowther Lefevre, and the apple of Tim's and Mum's eyes, and Bobo, her devoted Pekingese, and grandmother to Esme Lowther Lefevre. Melinda, what were you thinking? Melinda, Esme's going to kill you when she's older. Can you imagine having to write that on every exam paper? Or maybe they'll be typing by the time she does exams. Full stop. I'm not sure that many people realised what a tough time Mum had had during her long life, and I wanted to share some of the struggles, which explains why she was the way she was. What to say about Mum? Well, she was a tour de force, a master of her own destiny and mine, determined and exceptionally opinionated. Other than that, she was quiet and unassuming. Not. Born in London in 1934 in Wetherby Gardens, either underneath or on top of General Allenby, I'm not sure which. They lived in the same building. Who remarked that she was a noisy baby. Some things never changed. Of divorced parents. She never met her father, which was strange given that he lived in Jersey and was only across the water from us when we were in Guernsey, but he didn't want to meet. And she only found out at the end of her life that the person who was known to her as Uncle Phil and her grandmother's second husband was in fact her grandfather. Marvellous thing, DNA. Mum's mum, Beryl, was a depressive, and she was beaten by her first husband, the one that Mum had never met, who was an alcoholic. And apparently this was something to do with his wartime experience, but we really know nothing about him. So it's difficult to judge, particularly as we never met him. She said, "If you hit me again, I will leave you." And Granny was good to her word. When he did that, she did exactly that. She left him. Mum had to be made a ward of court as a baby, which must have been extremely difficult for our grandmother and also for Mum's grandmother too. There was a lot of scandal, as her supposed grandfather, Sir Charles Lowe, was the Minister for Agriculture of India and Burma. So this created a huge amount of embarrassment for the family, as her granny had also left her husband, which was an unusual situation in those days, obviously because he was a pain and really boring, and she never really wanted to marry him in the first place. And she ran off with Philip Percival and headed back to England from Ceylon. My favourite story from those days was when Granny great-granny was out with her husband and a party, and they were hunting tigers. And Mum's granny and her sister Gertie were making tea at a campfire. One of the locals came along saying, "Mem Saab, tiger coming." And they all went to climb trees, including Granny Gertie, who was wearing an extremely long skirt and was trying to climb the tree, still holding onto the kettle. Politically incorrect, I know, but I always loved that story, and it makes me smile. Stories of the Raj were always part of our childhood, and Mum even spoke some Hindustani, which came back when she visited India with her friend Jenny Haley, who went to a marriage of her nephew-in-law in Delhi. The Prime Minister of India attended the ceremony, so it was a very posh affair and went on for several days. Mum loved it and spoke about it for years afterwards. Granny Beryl was a very complex woman, extremely talented and skilled, but that meant she never really settled on anything. She was a great artist, she was a talented writer, she was a fantastic gardener, having studied horticulture at Reading, which was not the done thing in the 20s, and she paid for it from her own inheritance. Not sure she took to parenthood, though, and could burn water, which, if you know our family, is not a very popular talent. I think that's where I learned to dislike Brussels sprouts. She managed to make them taste like sponges. Well, Dad fell head over heels for my mother, who was very young and quite beautiful, which was his way. And that was that for Dad. Mum had to leave drama school as the scholarship to Lambda, where she went away when Granny moved out of the home. Dad had a massive heart attack and Mum left drama school to take care of him. He was quite the most charming man that most women had ever met. When he spoke to you, his deep blue eyes saw through to your soul and you felt you were the only person in the room. They formalised their relationship when Mum turned 21. They were unable to marry due to him technically being her stepfather, although they could have married in Denmark, but they never found out until long after Dad had died, sadly. My half-siblings were, for the most part, utterly vile, with the exception of my really talented sister, Angie, who was an artist, and with whom we had a really good and loving relationship. When she moved with her daughter Amanda back to Australia, it broke my dad's heart, as he knew it would be the last time he ever saw her, and she was by far his favourite child from his first marriage. His first wife, Kath, who was an Australian, known by Mum as her ex-wife-in-law, adored my mother and treated her like another daughter. Dad was a fantastic rider and had been a cavalry officer in World War I, got shot on the Somme in 1916 and ended up in Palestine fighting under General Allenby. He knew Lawrence of Arabia and became a bodyguard to one of the Faisals in Damascus. Dad did have a lot of male friends too, as he was great fun and very naughty. And in the Second World War, he was in Holland heading to Dunkirk when he was caught and arrested by the Germans. He was a prisoner of war of the Germans for 5 years and was being marched to Mauthausen to be gassed by the Germans and was rescued by a division of General Patton's troops, which saved his life. He was imprisoned during that time with Douglas Bader, who was not apparently the nicest of guys. Dad had terrible PTSD. He'd lost a number of friends in both World Wars, and also a woman that he loved and had nearly married was exterminated. We think in Auschwitz, but we're not sure. I don't think you ever get over that kind of thing. That said, I doubt many really knew that what he'd been through, as he never spoke about it, and had refused to testify at Nuremberg as he didn't think it would make any difference and would not bring anyone back. He was an incredible dancer, and Mum used to say that people would stop dancing just to watch Dad and her on the dance floor. He was that good. The parents spent some time in Ireland, and this is where Mum's love of Tullamore Dew came from. Unsurprisingly, they were friends with the people who owned the distillery. Mum and Dad also lived on Exmoor, with stories of daring do, with Dad falling in a ditch with his motorbike and their beloved Pekingese Ting being clocked at 17 miles an hour chasing the motorbike. They lived in Kelly House, which was terribly cold. I think that's near Devon stroke Cornwall border, and I'd been in the Kelly family for 900 years. I remember Mum saying that it was extremely cold and somewhat run down. And we still own a coffee table which they bought, and I think was made by Warren Kelly. And the design has a cutout to allow you to get closer to the fire. And it must be something about like 70 years old by now, because it was made before I was born, and it's still going strong. And there they met the Elbow family. The mother knitted my dad the most beautiful Norwegian-style sweater, which is still in Mum's chest of drawers to this day, and she used to wear it a lot, I think because it reminded her of Dad, but I don't know. And also it was a really nice jumper. We were born in 61 and 64, me then high. We lived in Devon in the UK, and Menton in France, Denmark, Holland, Mallorca and Tenerife, and settled in Guernsey when I was around 5 years old. Dad sadly died, aged 79, in 1970 in Guernsey. They had some amazing friends, and they were always entertaining. Mum's favourite story is when we were in Tenerife, Dad had bought the entire stall-holder supply of things like toot sweets. This came out around the time of Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. They held a party, and Dad called all the kids into the garden and gave everyone a handful of sweets, which were pure sugar and shaped like whistles. The instruction was not to eat them or touch them until they were in the car on the way home, and to blow them as loud as they could all the way home. And we lived on a one-way street. Most of the kids did exactly what Dad had asked them, and he had promised if he got enough complaints from furious parents, then he'd give them some more at another party in the future. You can imagine how furious his friends were. He really did love that, and he had the most wicked sense of humour. On another occasion, after yet another heart attack, there was some sort of exhibition, a bit like the Ideal Home exhibition, but in Guernsey, so therefore much smaller. And the police had a stand with a sort of computer game designed to test your driving reactions. Mum was determined to stop Dad from driving, as she thought it was bad for his heart. The police made Dad do the test at least 4 times. His reactions were so good that the police thought that there was a problem with the machine. None of the police drivers had scored as highly as Dad. He did only have 2 speeds, however. One was flat out and the other one was stop. In his youth, he'd driven at Broadlands, which was that banked racing circuit, and by all accounts, he was quite talented. Mum was furious as Dad refused to stop driving after that. Sadly, on the 24th of June, 1970, when Dad stood up to get ready for another party, he just dropped down dead. Mum was forbidden from trying to resuscitate him, as she broke a number of his ribs the last time she tried. It was quite honestly the end of our world as we knew it. It meant no more invitations to fabulous parties, and Mum had to go out to work the week after he died. Mum did some nursing in a care home and then got a job as a school cook, which we much preferred, and eventually became the Guernsey Council on Alcoholism. When she was the school cook, we had fantastic holidays, and we'd go camping all summer, and we used to stay with a farmer in a field just outside St Malo, and Mum would take him a bottle of scotch as a thank you, and then we'd spend the whole of the holiday touring around France and visiting Holland and Germany and Austria, visiting with friends in order to save money. One year, we met with some Canadians who were visiting Guernsey, and they were planning to sail around the world in a Dutch Lemsterark called Sophia, which is a fishing barge. And we were invited that summer to go and join them in Piombino, and we sailed all the way to Elba and Corsica, and we had a fantastic time. And we met an Italian contessa who was one of the world leading experts on free diving. Mum got a cramp and nearly drowned and had to be saved by her. Oh, that was an amazing holiday, and we had the most incredible food, and it was just magical. We had the most beautiful Siamese cat when we lived in Guernsey. He was called Peepo. Peepo was a terrible thief. And much to our embarrassment, he used to go down the street, biting the top of the Tetra Paks, pushing them over so he could drink the cream, and then he'd move on to the next one. The other thing he did was break into people's houses, obviously neighbours, and steal food. And he brought home a fillet steak and apparently a bag of mushrooms, but that might be one of Mum's embellishments. Well, she did go to drama school after all, so you never know. However, it was true he was a thief, and our lovely neighbours who babysat him when we were away on our travels, the husband was in fact a policeman, and he found it a tad embarrassing living with a feline felon. He was a real-life cavity. Peepo, not the policeman. Jaime and I were fish out of water. We were too grown up to play with kids and too young to be with adults. And we never liked the food that we were provided when we went around to people's houses, because they used to feed us like kid food, and we weren't used to eating grown-up food. And we were always felt like outsiders and not really understanding the scandal of our origin until much later on in life. Kath, Mum's ex-wife-in-law, was, to all intents and purposes, our grandmother, and we adored her, and our feeling, I think, was entirely mutual. After Dad died, life was really tough for us all, and Hi and I had to sell our vegetables on the streets from our garden to make ends meet, and I worked most school holidays and evenings to earn pocket money to help the family kitty. Jaime baked cakes and set up a business called Jaimito's Gatos. He put an ad in the Guernsey Press on Mum's account, and he was very successful. Mum had to pay for all the ingredients. I did the washing up. Mum had to deliver the cakes, and he was only 9. And that is true. He really did do that. All the while, Mum catered for parties for friends, and often going to those parties to serve things, whilst Jaime and I were the free wait staff, which we weren't very impressed by. Very upsetting, as the ingredients were much nicer than the endless tripe we had, and which I hated, or perhaps loathed would be more accurate. And I still hate peanut butter sandwiches, which I had every single day for lunch, as it was cheap. Some of our amazing friends in Guernsey used to do things like buy us groceries, including things like washing powder, when we were very hard up. And they would invite us for meals and make us run around the garden 10 times to make room for pudding. That was Claude Munty Lillyclap, who also had a Siamese cat. I can't remember what his name was, though. We had many wild parties with people aged 8 to 80, and this helped Mum to raise money for the Guernsey Council on Alcoholism by having very boozy auctions done by the best auctioneer in Guernsey. And anybody who can remember his name, I'd be really grateful, because I can't remember. He was hilarious. And it's quite funny when you think about the topic. It was incredibly boozy. Anyway, she was helped by the brother of Richard Burton, who donated memorabilia of his brother to auction off, as Richard Burton had been an alcoholic too. Mum broke her back when I was 14, and we had so much help from the Mowbray family, and also I think the Bolts. Jaime went to stay with them, and I stayed with the Mowbrays, who had me to stay, and I sort of adopted them, and they've been trying to get rid of me ever since. The Mowbrays arranged Tim and Mum's wedding, which was another very boozy affair, as I recall. There's a theme here. Mum married Tim when I was I don't know, 15, maybe 16, I can't quite remember. Tim had been married to a very fiery half-French lady, Maggie, but she ran off with a mutual friend when Tim was in the Pacific, navigating a huge ocean-going cargo ship delivering live sheep from Australia to Jeddah. Tim's half-brother, Anthony, was at Sandhurst with my dad, and he knew Tim. My dad knew Tim very well. We used to visit Jersey to see Tim and Maggie, and I remember some amazing dinner party when my father was flirting outrageously with Maggie's mother, who was French, in beautiful French, and every compliment being more dramatic and funnier than the previous one. It's a real skill and something really wonderful to behold if you haven't had the chance to experience it. My dad saw Jaime and I sitting on the stairs watching everything, and he looked at us, and we knew we were in trouble, and we ran right upstairs to bed to avoid our dad's displeasure without a single word being said. Maggie and Tim were wonderful hosts, and we loved staying with them, and they were always very boozy affairs. I got to go on Tim and Mum's honeymoon because I had to help Mum find Tim's ship in Rouen, as I spoke excellent French, so I got dragged along. Poor Tim was a skipper of a grain carrier at the time, going up and down the Clyde and the Seine and the Thames, and it was known as the ship that did everything backwards. The Thames harbour pilot couldn't helm the boat as it had no bow thrusters. Tim had to take over and entered all the docks to enter the inner harbour basins in London docks backwards, coming into dock the HMV Skirbeck, the ship itself, with the gentlest of kisses you were hardly able to feel coming alongside the dock. He was a fantastic sailor and such a kind man. His crew admired him so much. He'd been at Dartmouth. His sailing skills were simply impeccable. He knew Prince Philip, who he said was a lovely guy and a great sailor too. Car driving, however, another story altogether. Red light at the traffic lights, he would accelerate. Green light, he would brake. Nightmare. Tim taught me to sail a very tender boat that we acquired from Sam Gregory, a Guernsey doctor, who had turned it turtle and snapped the mast whilst out racing it with another doctor, Richard Sonrays. The damaged boat resided in a spare garage at the Mowbray House opposite the Little Chapel in Guernsey, and Tim and I did it up and Tim designed a replacement mast and had it built by Proctor Metal Masts and shipped to Guernsey, and we spent a happy summer fixing it up and sailing it to Herm, often with the Mowbray clan on board. Not sure Susie enjoyed the sailing and really just wanted to go home. When we came to sell the boat, I was able to repay Tim in full and buy my first car. Tim hit his head so many times in our old house because of the low ceilings in Guernsey. They sold it and moved to Jersey, which he preferred. Also, one of Mum's former clients popped round to congratulate Mum on the wedding. When he got out of jail, Tim wouldn't let him in, and Mum, who was in the bath at the time, covered in bubbles, had to run down the stairs dressed in nothing more than a towel to intervene, otherwise Leslie would have broken the door down. Probably really why Tim wanted to leave Guernsey. I say nothing. Melinda came along when I was 17. Melinda was born in Jersey and was, as I said, the apple of Mum's and Tim's eyes. Hi and I were both brats and behaved badly. Tim, who had been on Operation Noah rescuing animals to build the Kariba Dam, had caught sleeping sickness while he was there, and which was treated with arsenic, and it killed the peripheral nerves in his hands. When Tim changed Melinda's nappy, he found it very fiddly, and he kept using the F word, which, as we told him, would be Melinda's first words if he didn't stop. And indeed, Melinda's very first word was indeed the F word. Sad to say, Tim fell and broke his leg whilst I was at university and had to be brought to the UK, as the Jersey hospital was utterly useless with his diabetes. Mum and Charlotte Reynolds had to kidnap him from the hospital and got him on the plane to Southampton, and I met them at Victoria Station and was allowed to drive the car into Victoria Station to collect him. Sadly, he had to spend a fair amount of time in Charing Cross Hospital in Hammersmith. Tim was so proud of Melinda, and when he went to Lowther, probably for a family funeral, The estate workers used to look in the carry cot and say, oh, how lovely it was to see a real Lowther back on the estate. Something that did not go down very well with Tim's nephew, James, as Anthony, James's brother, was in fact the progeny of Edward VII, a fact that James mentioned to the Queen once at Windsor Castle and was never invited back. His then wife, Nancy, an American, was mortified, but one of the Queen's ladies-in-waiting said, never mind, dear, it happens all the time. I went back to Jersey after university to help Mum and take care of Melinda and Granny, who, despite hating us all, moved into a flat in our house in St Clement's. Tim used to say that we should have put up a sign over the door, abandon hope, all ye who enter here, as she was so utterly depressing. He went and had a drink with her almost every night. What a kind thing to do. Sadly, unbeknownst to us, Tim had pancreatic cancer and died in 1984, my last year at university, and we all nursed him at home, which is where he wanted to die, in his own bed, which I'm glad we were able to do for him. Mum and Melinda had many adventures, with Melinda listening to books on tape and learning the entire repertoire of Jane Austen's by heart. A love for literature she shared with Mum and Jaime. I'm being the odd one out, being the scientist. They did huge tours of the grand houses in the north of England, going to Lowther Castle to visit Hugh, Tim's great-nephew, Angela Horny Old Strickland, fantastic name that, at Sizer Castle just outside Kendal, Broughton Hall outside the Skipton to visit the Tempests, lifelong friends of Tim's, and Blair Drummond to visit Sir John and Lady Elizabeth Muir, Lady Elizabeth having been best friends with Tim's mum, in an attempt to give Melinda a view of the life that she would have had if Tim had not died so very young. Or rather when Melinda was so very young. Tim was the younger son of the Earl of Lonsdale, which he wore very lightly and was one of the world's true gentlemen. Melinda and Mum also managed to get to Canada to see close friends and relatives and had a fantastic time for Melinda's 21st birthday. It's really amazing when you think about it, as they travelled the day before 9/11. A little later on, I can't quite remember when, Derek Wintle came into our lives. He moved in with Mum in Jersey by accident rather than design, and they had some lovely adventures together in Europe and the UK. Mum was terribly fond of his kids, Robin, Johnny and David. Derek was a radio ham, and his radio used to interfere with our television reception and also with the phone. He didn't believe us, and then finally discovered we were right, and had to spend an entire year trying to fix it. Derek moved to Alderney to live with his sister after a few years, and sadly he died of melanoma. Derek's arrival provided me with a moment to escape to Bermuda for 7 years, where Melinda and Mum were frequent visitors. When I moved back, Mum was not well and sold up Ivystone House, which in retrospect was a bad idea, as we had the best neighbours, the Wu family, and they've been lifelong friends, and who right up to Mum's death have been a very big part of all of our lives, Lyndon, Tom and Pearl, who've been woven into our life path ever since they saw Tim and I labouring to make a hole in the granite wall outside the front of our house to get the car closer to the house, as Mum was pregnant with Melinda at the time. Mr. Wu thought we were the workmen. I always looked scruffy, even back then, and Tim never wore a jumper that didn't have a hole in it. That's why I liked him so much. Mum moved to a house which had been uninhabited for 7+ years. That was called Meadowlands, and I dug out the floor and accidentally bringing down the ceiling when I swung my sledgehammer too high, a story she embellished and always omitted to explain that as a result of that, we discovered that there was also dry rot, which wouldn't have happened if I hadn't had that little accident. She moved again in 2002 to Tudor House in town, just outside St Helier, because it was right on top of the Co-op supermarket, who at that time had a post office. No such luck anymore, unfortunately. The Co-op's still there, but not the post office. She did some work on the house, but not that much after she first moved in. Needless to say, it was in a bit of a state. Mum loved big parties and was, as she was not afraid to tell me, a far better cook than me. Sadly, as she got older, her friendship circle aged, and she basically lost the majority of her friends. By the time she died, which was really sad for her, and I think she was genuinely really lonely. She made tremendous friends with people from all walks of life, many of whom did work for us and who remain friends to this day and completely devoted to Mum up to the last, which is quite something, really. She became fantastic friends with Helen Millard, who she visited infrequently but spoke with nearly every single day, and together they did the Telegraph Saturday General Knowledge crossword. Mum was simply furious when the Telegraph stopped being printed in Jersey, and she had to learn how to do the crossword online, which she managed to do and did it on her iPad. She was really good at texting and loved Facebook too. She even learned how to FaceTime, dear God, messaging me in the middle of Zoom calls when I was working from home, and loved to message all my friends and tell them what terrible things I'd been doing. Well, in her eyes, like binging on Welcome to Wrexham on Disney+, to which I became addicted in latterly rather. She loved the Antique Roadshow, the Salvage Hunters, and many programmes on home improvement and house hunting. The repair shop was also a firm favourite, and when we took a clock that needed to be repaired to Steve, who was on the programme, the watch and clock expert, which was very exciting. She did love going to the theatre, but with COVID that didn't happen. Hadn't happened for a very long time. Jaime becoming such a successful chef, he trained with trained at Prue Leith's cookery school and worked in her restaurant in Notting Hill, and was headhunted by Terence Conran, and he worked at Pont de la Tour. This was a source of great pride, and she loved having huge parties at the Yellow House, Jaime and Rob's restaurants, and she flirted with all the staff outrageously and, of course, encouraged by Jaime. Thank you, Rob Wenberg, for organising everything and making a fuss of her. She loved it, although she'd never admit it. Mum was thrilled to have a granddaughter, but was not really able to be a proper grandmother, as by that point she was already not terribly well. She was tremendously proud of Melinda getting her master's, which made up for Melinda taking 5 years to get her maths degree. Mum always kept ramming Melinda's master's down my throat. Not that I was upset or anything, not. She really enjoyed Melinda and Simon's wedding, and watching Jaime give Melinda away was a big thrill, although obviously it would have been preferable to have had Tim there, but Jaime did a really good job. The greatest joy in her latter years was the discovery of my third cousin, Joyce Morton, who is currently 96. I met Helen Port when I was working for the British Council following my return from Peru on Operation Raleigh in 1985. Helen worked for Reaper, a supplier of services to the British Council. Helen's family had a strong Cumbrian collection, and her dad was a professor of history at QMC, where I went to university. I had to go to a social event which I didn't want to attend, and Helen accosted me as I was reading a textbook. How rude of me. This was a very fortuitous encounter. It just so happened that Helen's mum, Mary, was best friends for over 50 years with Joyce Morton, who lived round the corner. Helen kept forgetting to ask me about my Henricus connection, or we would have met sooner, as her mother had found my grandmother's and my grandfather's names in the book about the Morton Whaley international relations, which had been written by Evelyn Whaley, Joyce's sister, with much assistance from Joyce's husband, Martin. Eventually, at a lovely summer party in the Port's back garden, I was introduced to Joyce and Martin. Martin was an amazing genealogist, and he jumped on my name and found my great-grandparents in the Balls Pond Road Cemetery, and then helped me locate my grandparents in Hoop Lane thereafter. with all my great uncles and also my dad's first cousin, Sir Basil Henricus, and Lady Rose Henricus. And actually, Joyce's sister Evelyn had worked with Basil in his charity in the East End of London. All of which led me to find the Delsem family, who had played with my father as a child on the beach in Deauville in France. He'd also spent pre-World War I years improving his French in Tours, while chasing girls, of course, with one of the Delsem boys. The descendants are Emma and Simon's wife Tamara in the US, and Emma's kids Dominic and Olivia, plus all of our West Coast US Dulcem cousins too. We also found more cousins via ancestry, Elizabeth Mills and latterly Carrie de Carteret. Now, I can't believe I've not known Joyce all my life, and her three daughters, Claire, Frances and Tessa, who live in the UK, and the brother, David, who lives in Australia. It brought back to life our father, and for once at a party, Jaime and I had more relatives than Melinda, which had never happened, as there were millions of Louders and still are. Jaime and I loved getting to know our extended family, and we've had some fantastic times with them all, predominantly at the Yellow House, Jaime's restaurant. Mum found this very exciting, and it reminded her so much of our father, Aubrey, who was great fun and quite an extraordinary and brave man, albeit somewhat badly behaved in his youth. Mum was incredibly well read, despite being dyslexic, and she always used to say she was shy, which is probably why she used to push Jaime, me and Melinda into doing all the things that she was too shy to do. Mum loved the theatre. She was a great lover of history too. She had the best reading voice, and all our friends used to love coming round to listen to Mum reading her stories, which we still loved right up to the end. And in fact, there's a cute video of her reading to Esme, my niece, on Facebook, if anybody's interested. Mum was so interested in my very, very eclectic friendship circle, who came from all over the world, probably due to my DNA, which comes from 6 regions. Poor Melinda only has 1. Shame. She also coached us for the Eisteddfords on both Guernsey and Jersey, and much to her huge pleasure, we often used to win first prizes, largely due to her coaching skills, but we never admitted that. Standing at the top of the stairs and holding poetry recitals at drinks parties was part of Jaime and my early life. Mum didn't torture Melinda with that as she mellowed in her older age. I'm no saint, and to say I didn't choose to look after her was a reality. Mum just moved in with me in London and never left. She was diagnosed with breast cancer at 70 and metastatic breast cancer at about 83. With the most amazing support from Dr. Thelma Bates, OBE, who was a world-leading expert in cancer medicine and palliative medical care. As a result, Mum got amazing treatment, which meant that the cancer didn't impact her too much. She lived a long life and was much like Marmite. Some loved her and some not so much. We moved back to Jersey and have been trying to do up Mum's house there ever since 2020, and it's still not finished. The move was so she could spend time with Esme, Melinda's daughter. I've been tremendously lucky as my friends and new relatives far and wide accepted Mum, which was extremely kind and generous on their part. We spent time in Denmark and all over France and parts of Germany and Austria and Italy and the USA and Bermuda and also Australia, and mostly my lovely friends who let me bring my mum as my +1 to any gatherings. Pearl and Dean Wu Smith held a big 60th for Pearl and invited us over, and Mum was quite in her element, holding forth and chatting up all Pearl and Dean's friends. Due to the state of disarray of our house, they held a really lovely 89th birthday party for Mum, and we had Giles Corbin and Lisa and Danny Lemaitre, Melinda and me, plus Dean and Pearl. I cooked, and Mum was actually in really good form and really happy and thoroughly enjoyed herself. Hard to believe that was just after her birthday on the 7th of October 2023. One final thing, the last year we got to know Steve Harben, our roofer, who managed to sort out the roof as we were ripped off by a cowboy builder who stole a lot of our money. And Steve, who's a phenomenal guy, fantastic skateboarder, completely fearless on the roof, he got us back on track, stopped the awful leaks. He visited Mum when I went away and came to see her in hospital twice. To say that he's an awesome person just doesn't do him justice. He's such a kind man, and Mum absolutely loved him like another son. And we will forever be in his debt, because without all of his efforts, we would have probably lost the house. The end for Mum was sad, as she fell down a staircase at home about 10 foot and refused point blank to go to hospital. I finally got her into hospital 2 days later, where they could nurse her properly. In the middle of this, our lovely friend Sean Nolan, our fantastic UK-based friend, flew over and spent an hour and a half with Mum. She met him in London when he was painting my neighbour's house opposite, and he's been adopted and has become known as Uncle Sean. We saw him whenever we were in London. It really cheered Mum up, and she was thrilled to have seen him. Unbeknownst to us, Mum had suffered a subdural hematoma. She'd been moved to a care home for respite care, but had to be transferred back to the hospital again. She died, as I said, at 15:55 on the 12th of December 2023, just after Melinda left to pick up Esme, and just in time for afternoon tea with my dad, my stepdad Tim, Kath, my stepmother, and Mum's cousin Dorothy, who she was terribly fond of, although I think Dorothy preferred coffee to tea. I'm sure she's now drinking Earl Grey tea and copious quantities of Tullamore Dew whiskey, and eating cucumber sandwiches without the crust, and telling rude stories with them, all surrounded by the many cats and dogs that we've had over the years, saying, "I told you I was ill." I need to say that Melinda has been really supportive, and it's been a tough time for Melinda and me, as Mum would not accept any help, and I really needed it so that I could balance her care and working full-time. Poor Melinda's been quite unwell throughout the last month, but was always there to help me deal with the admin and support me through the horrible decisions that you have to make when dealing with these situations. So thank you, Melinda. I won't forget what you've done, and I really do appreciate all of the help. I will miss Mum, despite her cantankerous comments and her sharp wit, although sometimes her comments could be really very harsh. She had been very gregarious in my youth and, well, loved, but her pain and all of her illnesses diminished her world, and I think she missed her many friends who had sadly died ahead of her. I know only too well the pain of losing a friend, and Mum lost many, but particularly her friend Liz, who died far too young, and Mum remained friends with Liz's daughter Amanda Furnival to the end of her days. She never really recovered from losing Liz and spoke about her often. May I, on behalf of the Foa and Lowther clans, just thank you so very much for all your kind comments, which have been an enormous comfort to us. Mum loved you all, even if you didn't know it. Fair winds, Mum, till we meet again. With all our love, Talia, Melinda and Jaime. And footnote, on the 17th of December, Melinda and I went with a friend of Melinda's to a bay called Anport and launched the flowers that we'd received from Susie and Karen Mowbray and Emma and Olivia and Dom Dalsone, and we watched them float away on the tide. It was really moving. Mum always loved the sea. I tried to keep the flowers in the house, but Sabu, my Bengal, kept eating them, and I was worried he was going to poison himself. Thanks very much for listening. If you've had to listen to this for the second time, apologies. And there are a few little extra stories I've added since the first edition. And I'd not done this as a live because it wasn't very successful last time, and it kept getting interrupted, probably from my lack of technical expertise. It's actually Christmas Day, and I'm in my PJs, and Ziva and I are in my cousin Joyce's house in London. And I've got a stinking cold, as you can hear. So I'm about to go and have a shower. We've listened to the King's speech. I think it's about 4 o'clock in the... No, it can't be 4. It must be later than that. It is now 17:05, and I'm still in my pyjamas. And I'm going to go and have a shower. So thanks for listening. Apologies if you've heard it all before. And thank you very much for everything that you did for my mum. Thank you for all the support that you've given me and Melinda and Jaime. We do appreciate it. We send love to you all and wish you and your families a very, very happy Christmas and very best wishes for 2024. Take care.